The crash, the sound, was the first thing she heard. A loud, endless roar. Metal twisting, something breaking apart. Sarah opened her eyes. Smoke burned her throat. She coughed and tried to sit up. Everything around her was red, red sand, red sky, and the glow of fire. Her escape pod lay on its side, half buried in the ground. The air was hot, thin, and dry. She touched her head. Her fingers came back with blood. Her heart raced. "Hello," she called. No answer. Only the sound of wind whistling through broken metal. Her communicator was in pieces. The rescue beacon was dead. She was alone. Then she heard it, a deep, slow sound. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. They came closer. Sarah grabbed a sharp piece of metal from the wreckage. Her hands shook, but she held it tight. She didn't know what was out there, but she was not going to die without a fight. From the shadows, a huge figure appeared. It was not human. He stood taller than any man she had seen, with broad shoulders and skin that looked like dark stone. His eyes glowed faint gold in the dim light. He wore strange armor, scratched and burned. In his hand was a weapon, a long staff with a blade at the end. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The alien's gaze moved to her. For a moment, they only stared at each other. She thought he might attack. Instead, he stepped to the side fast, sharp, and his blade flashed. Something screeched behind her. She spun around. Six-legged beast lay on the sand, its mouth full of teeth, its eyes black and dead. The alien had killed it in one strike. Sarah froze. If he hadn't acted, that thing would have torn her apart. The alien said something in a deep, rough voice. She didn't understand the words. He pointed at the wreckage, then at the horizon. I don't know what you're saying," she whispered. The alien's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he turned and started walking. He glanced back once, as if telling her to follow. Sarah hesitated. Could she trust him? He was big, strong, dangerous, but the dead creature in the sand proved one thing: she would not survive here. Alone, she followed. The sun was harsh, burning her skin. The sand stretched forever in all directions. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked. The alien walked without slowing, his heavy steps sure and steady. They stopped near a group of tall rocks. The alien scanned the sky, then pointed to a shadowed gap between the stones. A cave, shelter dot inside. It was cooler. The alien set down his weapon and took something from his belt, a small, round device. He pressed a button and a faint light appeared, bright enough to show the rough walls and the floor covered in sand. Sarah sat down, exhausted. Her hands still shook. He looked at her again, then reached into a pouch. He pulled out a container, opened it, and offered her a sip of water. She drank. It was warm, but it was life. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't reply. He only watched her, silent and unreadable. Night fell fast on the desert world. Through the cave's entrance, Sarah saw the sky change. The sun vanished, replaced by 2 moons and countless stars. For a moment, it was almost beautiful. Then she noticed something else. Lights, moving lights. They were far away, but they were not ships coming to rescue her. The lights moved low across the ground, in strange patterns, like a search. The alien saw them too. His hand went to his weapon. He spoke quickly, urgently. But she still didn't understand. The lights grew brighter, closer. Sarah's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Whoever or whatever was out there, they were coming toward the cave. The alien motioned for silence. They waited in the dark. The only sound, the whisper of wind outside. The first shadow appeared at the mouth of the cave. It was not human. And it was not friendly. Asterisk enemies or allies. The shadow at the mouth of the cave moved. Sarah held her breath. The alien warrior stood in front of her, blocking her with his body. His blade was raised, the faint moonlight sliding across its sharp edge. A low growl came from outside. Another shadow appeared, then another. 3 shapes stood in the sand, tall, thin, and wrong. Their skin glistened under the twin moons. Their eyes glowed a sickly green. They carried weapons not like the alien warrior's blade, but jagged, rusted metal, as if stolen from many places. One of them hissed. The sound made Sarah's skin crawl. The warrior beside her spoke in his deep voice, sharp and commanding. She didn't know the words, but the tone was clear. A warning. The creatures laughed. The sound was high and ugly. In one fast motion, the first creature charged. The alien warrior met him halfway, their weapons clashing. Sparks flew. The fight was quick. Brutal, the warrior's movements strong and precise. Sarah backed deeper into the cave, her heart pounding. But the second creature saw her and broke into a run. She grabbed the only thing near her, a rock. She swung. With all her strength, the rock smashed against the creature's head, and it stumbled back with a hiss of pain. Before it could recover, the warrior was there. His blade flashed, and the creature fell, unmoving. The third one turned and fled into the darkness. Silence returned. Only the sound of Sarah's own ragged breathing filled the cave. The alien warrior stood over the bodies for a moment, then knelt and searched them. He took a small pouch from one and tossed it to her. Inside was dried food, strange looking, but food. Sarah's hands trembled as she took a bite. It was tough, salty, and bitter, but it eased the sharp pain in her stomach. The warrior sat near the cave's entrance, eyes on the desert. His chest rose and fell slowly, but Sarah could see the dark stains spreading on his side. "You're hurt," she said quietly. He didn't answer. But when she moved closer, he didn't stop her. The wound was deep, a slash from the first attacker's blade. His blood was darker than hers, almost black. She tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it against the wound. He tensed, then looked at her with a strange expression, not anger, not fear. "Something else, Karen," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" He tapped his chest. Karen was his name. "Sarah," she said, touching her own chest. His golden eyes studied her for a moment. Then, with a small nod, he looked back toward the horizon. They stayed in the cave that night, taking turns watching the entrance. Sarah couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her tense. She kept thinking of the way those creatures had looked at her as if she was nothing but prey. By dawn, the wind had covered the bodies outside with sand. The desert was empty again. But the silence didn't feel safe. Karen stood and motioned for her to follow. They walked for hours under the burning sun. Sarah's legs ached, but she said nothing. The desert was endless, broken only by jagged cliffs in the distance. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Karen led her to a crack in the cliff wall, a narrow passage that opened into a small canyon. Here, the air was cooler, and thin plants grew between the rocks. They found water trickling from a stone ledge. Sarah drank deeply, the cold water, washing away the dust from her throat. Karen drank too, then crouched near the plants, pulling some roots from the ground. He sliced one open and offered it to her. The taste was sharp and sour, but refreshing. For the first time, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Maybe they could survive here. But then she saw Karen stumble. His wound was worse than she thought. She tried to tell him to rest, but he shook his head and pointed upward, toward the canyon walls. At first, she didn't see it. Then her stomach turned cold. High above, watching them, were more of those green-eyed creatures. They weren't alone. The predator high above the canyon. The green-eyed creatures watched in silence. Sarah's skin prickled. She felt like prey under their gaze. Karen stood still, his golden eyes locked on them. His grip tightened on his blade. The faint wind carried the smell of dust and something. Foul. Then, without warning, the creatures slipped away. Vanishing over the ridge, Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Why didn't they attack? She whispered. Karen didn't answer. He scanned the canyon walls, then the shadows between the rocks. His jaw tightened. He knew something she didn't. They continued moving, deeper into the canyon, following the sound of running water. The stream widened into a small pool, surrounded by twisted plants. It should have felt safe, but Edith Sarah crouched to fill a makeshift container from the pool. That's when she noticed the silence. No insects, no wind, no sound at all. Karen, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. A shadow passed over the water. She looked up and froze. Perched on a rock above them was a massive creature. Its body was long and coiled like a snake, but it had 4 thick legs, ending in claws the size of her hands. Its head was wide, flat, and crowned with spines. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth dripping with thick saliva. Karen didn't hesitate. He stepped between Sarah and the beast, blade raised. The predator dropped to the ground with a thud that shook the stones. It circled them slowly, its tail sweeping the sand. Its black eyes never blinked. Sarah's chest tightened. She could feel its hunger, not rage, not fear, just hunger. The predator lunged. Karen moved faster than she thought possible. His blade struck its side, slicing deep, but not deep enough. The beast roared, the sound echoing through the canyon. It swung its tail. Karen blocked it, but the force sent him sliding back. His wound tore open again, blood dripping into the sand. Sarah grabbed a long stick from the ground. Her hand shook, but she gripped it tight. She darted toward the predator's side, jabbing the stick into one of its black eyes. The beast screamed, thrashing wildly. It turned toward her, teeth snapping. She stumbled back, her foot catching on a rock. Before it could strike, Karen drove his blade into the base of its skull. The predator let out one last sharp cry, then collapsed, its body twitching before going still. The canyon was silent again, except for the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing. Karen yanked his blade free, then leaned on it for support. His chest rose and fell heavily. Sarah rushed to his side. "You're bleeding too much." He looked at her, his expression unreadable, then sank to one knee. She tore another strip from her clothes, pressing it against the wound. "You saved me," she said, her voice trembling. Karen's gaze softened for the first time. He said something in his language, low, almost gentle, but she didn't understand. Still, she knew it was not a threat. They skinned part of the predator, taking what meat they could carry. The rest, Karen left for scavengers as they made their way out of the canyon. Sarah noticed tracks in the sand-clawed feet, smaller than the predators. She realized with a cold chill that the green-eyed creatures had been following them the whole time, waiting for the beast to finish the job. That night, they made camp beneath a jagged rock ledge. The fire Karen built was small, hidden, its light flickering on the stone. Sarah lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the desert. Somewhere out there, the green-eyed ones were still hunting. But it wasn't just them she worried about. The planet itself felt alive, and it did not want them here. Far away, in the darkness beyond the firelight, something else moved, watching, waiting. Asterisk, asterisk, the other survivors, the fire burned low, sending faint shadows across the rock walls. Sarah sat close to it, hugging her knees. Karen was sharpening his blade. The sound of stone on metal, steady and calm. But outside the circle of light, something moved. It was not the wind. Karen stopped sharpening. his head tilted slightly, listening. The glow from the fire caught the gold in his eyes. Without a word, he stood and gripped his weapon. Sarah's breath slowed. She could feel it too, now, the faint crunch of footsteps in the sand. Not the slithering of a beast. Not the claws of the predator they had faced. These were two-legged. A shadow appeared at the edge of the light. Then another. 3 figures stepped forward. Their faces half hidden by masks made from animal skulls. The green glow in their eyes was unmistakable. Sarah's heart pounded. These were the same ones from the canyon. They spoke in sharp, fast words, their voices low and cold. Karen replied in his own tongue, his voice like stone, steady, but with an edge of anger. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They knew each other. The tallest of the strangers laughed a dry, cruel sound. He pointed at Sarah. Then he pointed at the ground, making a gesture like binding wrists. Sarah's blood ran cold. What is he saying? She asked her. Voice trembling, Karen didn't answer. He stepped closer to the strangers, blade in hand. The tall one drew his own weapon, a curved clawed blade that seemed to drink the firelight. They circled each other, the air between them heavy. Then, without warning, the fight began. Karen moved first, striking fast. His blade clashed against the black one with a sound like thunder. Sparks lit the night. Sarah backed toward the rock wall, eyes wide. The other 2 masked strangers moved toward her, weapons ready. Her hand found a broken spear Karen had left near the fire. She grabbed it just as one of the strangers lunged. She swung hard, catching him in the chest. He staggered back with a hiss. The second one came at her from the side. She ducked, the blade missing her by inches. Sand sprayed her face as she stumbled, but she held on to the spear. Karen and the tall stranger fought like 2 storms colliding. Every strike was heavy, every movement fast and deadly. But Karen's side wound slowed him. The tall stranger saw it and smiled. He feinted left, then slashed right, his blade cutting across Karen's ribs. Blood sprayed the sand. Karen! Sarah shouted. Her cry made the tall stranger glance at her for a split second. That was enough. Karen's blade came up in a swift, brutal arc, catching him across the neck. The tall stranger dropped to the sand, unmoving. The other 2 froze, eyes wide. Then, without a word, they turned and ran into the darkness. Karen dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Sarah ran to him, pressing her hand against the fresh wound. "You're going to bleed out if we don't stop this," she said, her voice shaking. He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something she didn't expect. They were my people. Sarah froze. Your people. Karen nodded weakly. Exiled. Hunted. By my own, the truth hit her hard. This planet wasn't just dangerous because of the beasts. There was a war here, one that Karen had already lost. She patched him as best she could. They had to move before the others came back with more fighters. By dawn, they had put miles between themselves and the battle site. The sun rose over a stretch of cracked earth, where giant bones jutted from the ground like the ribs of some long-dead giant dot. Sarah stopped, to rest, her body aching. That's when she noticed something. Her hands trembled. Her stomach felt strange, not from hunger, but from something deeper. She didn't want to think it. She didn't want to believe it. But the thought wouldn't leave. She pressed a hand against her belly. No, it's impossible. Yet, deep inside, she already knew. Something had begun. A new life. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but Sarah's thoughts were trapped inside her own mind. Every step felt heavier than the last. She kept her hand near her stomach, almost without thinking. It had been days since the crash, but now, something felt different. Her body was tired, yes, but this was not just exhaustion. Karen walked ahead, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the sand. His pace was steady, but Sarah could see the stiffness in his steps. His wounds had not fully healed, and every mile they walked pulled more strength from him. At midday, they stopped under the shade of a massive rock formation. The heat pressed down like a weight. Sarah crouched by the shade, sipping from their last small container of water. Karen sat across from her, sharpening his blade. He glanced at her more than once, his golden eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing her unease. Finally, he spoke. "You, weak." Sarah hesitated. Not weak, just different. He tilted his head. Different. How? She didn't answer right away. She didn't even know how to say it. The truth was too strange, too impossible. But here, on this dead world, the impossible was starting to feel like the only rule, I think. Her voice faltered. "I think I might be carrying life." Karen froze. His blade lowered. His eyes locked on hers, searching. Life. Sarah placed her hand on her stomach. She didn't need to explain further. For a long moment, he said. Nothing. The wind howled softly between the rocks. Then he leaned forward. His voice was quiet, but steady. If true, be protect. Always, she swallowed hard. How is this even possible? He looked away, toward the horizon. My kind. In rare times, can bond. Survival. Life seeks life. If connection strong. Life begins. Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the nights they had shared shelter, the food they had hunted together, the way they had fought side by side. Survival had pushed them close, closer than she had realized. But before she could speak again, a sound echoed from the open desert, distant. Low, steady. Drums tack snapped toward. The sound, not safe here. They packed quickly and moved deeper into the rock maze, but the sound grew louder. Soon shapes appeared between the cliffs, more of the green-eyed warriors. Their skull masks gleaming in the light. Sarah's pulse raced. They found us. Karen's hand went to her shoulder, urging her into a narrow crevice between the stones. They squeezed through until the passage opened into a hidden cavern. Inside, the air was cooler, and faint light filtered from above. Through cracks in the stone, for a moment they caught their breath. Sarah's heart still pounded in her chest. She rested against the wall, closing her eyes. Karen moved to the entrance, crouching low. He listened. The drum beats faded, replaced by the soft hiss of shifting sand. They hunt, he murmured. Sarah knew he was right. They wouldn't stop. Not now. Not with Karen's exile, and not with her carrying something they could see as a weakness, or a prize. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Sarah tried to sleep, but her mind kept spinning. The child inside her, if it was real, would be part human, part alien. A life that had never existed before. But in this place, life was fragile. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and it could be lost. When night came, Karen finally spoke again. We move tomorrow. Far. Find safe place. Not here. Sarah nodded. And if they follow? He looked at her, his eyes fierce. Then we fight. For you, for the life. The weight of his words settled deep inside her. She realized then that they were no longer just two survivors. They were something more. Outside the cavern, far beyond the cliffs. Green eyes glowed in the dark, watching, waiting asterisk. The rescue that isn't night had been endless. Sarah lay awake, listening to the steady drip of water from the cavern walls, counting each drop as if it could keep her calm. Karen had barely slept either. He sat near the entrance, sharpening his blade in slow, controlled strokes. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward the narrow slit in the rock, watching for movement. When the first pale light of dawn touched the cavern floor, Sarah thought she heard it, a distant hum. Faint at first, almost blending with the wind. But then it grew louder, not the low, menacing drumbeats of the green-eyed hunters. Something else. Karen's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed, focusing on the sky. The hum became a deep thrumming. A shadow swept across the desert. Sarah rushed to the entrance and looked up. A ship. Her heart jumped into her throat. "It's a rescue ship," she gasped. The craft was sleek, metallic, its engines glowing a warm gold. It circled once above the cliffs, then slowed, lowering toward the canyon floor. Sarah turned to Karen, a smile breaking across her face. "We're going home." But Karen didn't smile. His jaw was tight, his body tense. "Not rescue," he said flatly. "What?" "No, it has to be." He shook his head, his voice low and certain. "Trap." Before she could argue, the ship landed in a whirl of dust and sand. A ramp lowered with a hiss, and figures emerged. At first, their silhouettes looked almost human, till the light caught their faces. Green eyes, her stomach sank. They weren't here to save her. They were here to take her. The green-eyed leader stepped forward, his mask carved from the skull of some huge desert predator. He spoke in the same sharp, guttural language Sarah had heard before, his voice carrying easily over the distance. Karen replied, his tone like steel. The leader's gaze shifted to Sarah. Slowly, he drew a long, hooked blade from his side and pointed it at her. Sarah took a step back. "Karen, what do they want?" His answer was short. "You." Before she could breathe, the green-eyed warriors rushed forward. Karen pushed her behind him, his blade flashing in the sun. The first attacker lunged and Karen's strike cut him down, but there were too many. They swarmed him, weapons clashing in a storm of metal and sand. Sarah grabbed a sharp piece of wreckage from the ground, swinging it at the nearest warrior. The jagged edge tore through his arm, and he fell with a howl. A sudden blast of heat roared past her. One of the warriors had fired some kind of energy weapon. It scorched the rock wall inches from her head. Karen fought like a force of nature, but the wound in his side slowed him. A warrior slammed into him from behind, knocking him to one knee. Another kicked his blade from his hands. "Karen!" She screamed. The leader strode forward, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him with terrifying ease. Karen struggled, his golden eyes locked on Sarah's. "Run!" He rasped, but she didn't. Instead, she darted toward the fallen blade, scooped it up, and charged. The leader turned toward her just as she drove the weapon into his side. His roar split the air, and he dropped Karen. Clutching at the wound, Karen snatched the blade from her hands and swung it in a wide arc, forcing the others back. "Ship," he barked, pointing toward the ramp. They ran. Sand churned under their feet as shouts and weapons fire exploded behind them. Sarah stumbled up the ramp first, turning to see Karen fighting off the last two attackers. One fell, but the other drove a blade into Karen's shoulder. He roared in pain, twisting and knocking the warrior aside before rushing into the ship. He slammed his hand on the controls. The ramp lifted. The engines screamed to life. The ship rose into the air just as the surviving warriors fired wildly, blasts striking the hull. Inside, Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. Karen leaned heavily against the wall, blood dripping down his arm. She stepped toward him, but he shook his head. "Not safe yet," she frowned. "What do you mean?" "We're in the air." Before he could answer, the ship jolted violently. The lights flickered. An alarm wailed through the cabin. Something was locking onto them from above. A life on the dead world, the ship shook so hard Sarah had to grab the wall to keep from falling. An alarm blared, flashing red light across the cabin. "Karen, what's happening?" she shouted over the noise. Karen's golden eyes were sharp and tense. "Missiles from the sky." Sarah's heart pounded. Missiles from who? He didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his hand on the controls, forcing the ship to veer sharply. The horizon spun in the viewing screen. The desert stretching below like an endless Red Sea. The first missile streaked past, missing by seconds. The second wasn't so kind. It hit the ship's right side, shaking it like a struck drum. Screamed, sparks rained from the ceiling. Smoke filled the cabin. The controls flickered, then died. "Engines gone," Karen growled. The ship dropped fast. Sarah's stomach lurched as the ground rushed toward them. She grabbed the seat straps and pulled them tight. "Brace," Karen ordered. The impact came like a thunderclap. A hole scraped across the sand, throwing up waves of dust until it finally stopped. Half buried at the edge of a jagged canyon. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was the faint crackle of fire. Sarah unbuckled, herself coughing from the smoke. Karen staggered to his feet, blood running down his arm, but his grip on the blade was still strong. From outside, faint at first, came the sound of engines. The green-eyed warriors hadn't given up. Karen moved fast. Out. Now, they left the broken ship and hurried into the canyon. The rock walls rose high on either side. The air cooler here, but heavy with silence. They didn't stop until they reached a wide open space. A dry basin surrounded by cliffs. In the center, the cracked ground was marked with strange, ancient carvings. Sarah paused, running her fingers over the symbols. "What is this place?" Karen looked around, scanning the shadows. "Old world, before my people came. Power here." Before she could ask more, a distant rumble shook the ground. Not engines. Something deeper. The sky darkened. Sarah looked up to see thick clouds rolling in fast, swirling in strange patterns. Lightning flashed, not white, but bright blue, splitting the clouds in jagged lines. Karen's expression changed. It was the first time she'd seen fear in his eyes. Storm. Not natural. The wind hit them hard, carrying sand and dust in blinding waves. Sarah shielded her face, but she could barely see through the haze. Shapes appeared, the green-eyed warriors, moving in tight formation. Their leader was different this time, taller, wearing a mask of blackened metal. Karen stepped in front of her, blade ready. "Stay behind me." The leader spoke in a booming voice that carried even through the wind. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the demand in them: surrender. Karen's answer was a single word, cold and final: no. The warriors rushed forward. The fight was chaos. The storm howled around them, sand stinging, skin, lightning striking the cliffs. Karen fought like the storm itself, his blade flashing in the blue light. Sarah swung a heavy rock at one attacker, knocking him to the ground. Then the ground cracked. A shockwave tore through the basin, knocking everyone off their feet. From beneath the carvings, water burst upward in a sudden roaring fountain, clear and pure. The storm's lightning struck it, lighting the water in brilliant flashes. The warriors hesitated, fear in their glowing eyes. One shouted something, and in seconds they were retreating into the dust. Sarah and Karen stood alone in the basin as the storm began to fade. The water kept flowing, pooling into a small, shining lake. Karen looked at her, his expression softer now. Life returns. Sarah understood. The storm, the carvings. This place had been waiting for something to awaken it, and now it had. They stayed in the basin for days, watching plants grow where the water spread. small animals appeared from the cliffs, drawn by the new life. One evening, Sarah sat by the water's edge, her hand resting on her stomach. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold and red. Karen came to her side, his presence solid and calm. "This world. Dead no more," he said quietly. She smiled. "Then, maybe. Neither are we." In the distance, far beyond the cliffs, a dark shape moved in the sky. A ship, but it didn't descend. It only hovered for a moment before turning away, vanishing. Into the clouds, Sarah watched it go, her heart steady. Whoever it was, whatever they wanted, it didn't matter now. She and Karen had found something more than escape. They had found a home, and soon. A new life would begin here on the dead world that was no longer dead. Asterisk shadows beyond the horizon, the basin was no longer silent. Where once there had been only dust and stone, water now shimmered under the twin moons. Green shoots had broken through the cracked ground, curling toward the sky. Small creatures darted between the plants, their calls echoing softly. Sarah sat by the water's edge, her feet in the cool shallows. She ran her hand over her stomach, feeling the faintest stir of movement. It was still early, but she knew this life inside her was growing stronger every day. Karen stood nearby, repairing a crude shelter made from the remains of their crash and the bones of long-dead beasts. He moved with care, his wounded side healing, though the scar would remain. "You work too much," she called. He glanced at her, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly the closest he came to a smile. "You worry too much." Sarah shook her head, though she smiled back. The warmth between them was something she had never expected on this world. Still, the feeling of safety was fragile. At night, she often woke to find Karen awake, his eyes scanning the cliffs. Once, when she asked, he simply said, "Storms do not wash away all dangers." That morning, she saw what he meant. While gathering plants near the canyon's edge, she noticed something half buried in the sand. A piece of metal, not from their ship. It was darker, heavier, with markings she didn't recognize. She turned it over, brushing away the dust, and saw deep claw marks scored into its surface. When she brought it to Karen, his expression darkened. "This, not from my people," he said slowly. "Then whose?" she asked. He didn't answer. Right away, he looked toward the far horizon where the land shimmered under the heat. "Old enemy," he said at last. "It's very old. If they come, water here will draw them." The thought chilled her. This oasis, this miracle, would not stay hidden forever. Days passed, the plants grew taller, the lake clearer. Sarah and Karen built stronger walls for their shelter, storing food and water. They were becoming more than survivors. They were settlers now, but the signs of others were growing. Footprints appeared near the basin, too large to be human, too fresh to be old. Once, Sarah saw movement high on the cliff at sunset, a shadow, tall and thin, watching before vanishing into the rocks. Then, one night, the sky lit up. Sarah woke to Karen's hand on her shoulder. He pointed upward. Far above, a streak. A fire cut through the darkness, followed by a second, smaller one. Both descended beyond the horizon, leaving trails of smoke. "What is it?" she asked. Karen's voice was grim. "Ships, not rescue. Not hunters we know. Something worse." The next morning, they prepared. Karen fashioned new weapons from scavenged metal. Sarah gathered food and wrapped it in bundles. They didn't know if they would have to leave the basin, but Karen insisted on being ready by the third day. The air itself felt heavier, as if the planet knew something was coming. The small animals had vanished. Even the wind was still. Sarah sat by the water, watching ripples spread across the surface. She thought about the life inside her. about what kind of world her child would grow up in. When Karen joined her, she didn't look away from the water. "Do you think we can protect them?" Shay asked softly. He crouched beside her, his voice low and certain. "We will, even if the whole sky burns." That night, they heard it, a deep, steady hum far in the distance. Not the sound of the green-eyed hunters, not the whine of their old ship. Something heavier. Older Sarah met Karen's gaze storm. "Coming," he said simply. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the dark between the stars, the next chapter of their fight for survival had already begun.